I'll call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to call roll.
No.
Bartlett.
Here.
Hirsch. Here. Swadley.
Here.
Boersma.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Reeves. Here. Majewski.
Here.
Engelberger.
Here.
Jensen.
Here.
Truel.
Here.
O'Connor.
Here.
And Kittleson is absent and excused. We have 11 alders present.
Great, thank you. Are there communications from our alderpersons this week? I know Alderperson Hirsch has one.
Thank you. First, I just want to make everybody aware, both council, the mayor, the staff, and the community, that the RDA, the Redevelopment Authority of Stoughton, is hosting the Riverfront Design Charrettes on June 9th, 10th, and 11th. That will be held at the EMS building down on 4th Street. I just want to let everybody know that the times for Friday is from 9 to about 4:30, Saturday 9 to 3, and Sunday 12 to 6. And from 4:30 to 6, we're going to have a pizza potluck to kind of showcase what the community design has come up with for that riverfront development. We want as many community members as possible and city staff and council members to attend. And city staff and council will be getting a sign-up genius for signing up for the potluck. So look out for that, and hope to see everybody there. Thanks.
Thank you. Further communications from our alderpersons? Alderperson Boersma.
Just to let everybody know that Memorial Day celebrations held at the Mann Center following a parade on Memorial Day, the 29th this year. And the parade starts at 10, and then the ceremonies at the Mann Center at 11. It's a great event, and hope people can come out for it.
And should it happen to be like today, it hasn't rained much lately, but should it happen to rain, we'll still have the ceremony at 11 o'clock at the Mann Center, but no parade if it's raining out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Council President Swadley.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple quick reminders. Council goals are due a week from tomorrow, and I'd like to thank those council members that have already submitted them. And those will be discussed in the first week in June at the Community Affairs Council Policy Meeting. And then the joint meeting with the school board is set up for July 20th at 7:30. And I'll get more details as I get them from the school district.
Thank you. And to let everyone know that this is EMS week. So happy EMS week to our EMTs who worked overtime, I'm sure, over the weekend to be sure that everything was and everyone was safe and secure. And I want to be sure and thank them for doing like all first responders do and being up at the middle of the night or all night long, whatever it might take to ensure that we have a safe community. So thank you to all of our EMTs out there. And next, with no further communications, we'll move into an open meetings law, ethics law, parliamentary procedure, and public records law presentation by Attorney Dragney. Matt.
Thank you, Your Honor. You all have in the packet the materials that were prepared for this presentation actually a year ago, and I'm using the same materials for the presentation this year. It's something that I think the city does sometimes.
I just wanted to note, it's not in your packet, but it's posted on the website with your packet materials, just in case we're looking. Thank you.
It's a clarification, yeah. So that's where you can find the materials. There is an outline, and then there are some articles that provide much more in-depth information on some of these topics that you can refer to if you have questions. So we're going to start with the open meetings law. What the open meeting law requires is that all meetings of governmental bodies be preceded by public notice, publicly held in places reasonably accessible to the public, and open to all citizens at all times, unless otherwise expressly allowed by law. This law applies to any governmental body, and so that would include not only the city council, but all local agencies, committees, commissions, boards created by the city. there is, well, I'm not going to get into that. Try to stay with important stuff for now. So what's the hard part about the open meetings law? The hard part is knowing what a meeting is. That's where all the confusion is. There is a legal presumption that if 1/2 or more of the members of a governmental body, that would be 1/2 the members of a committee, for example, or 1/2 the members of the council, if you've got 1/2 or more present, there is a legal presumption that that is a meeting that's a meeting being held for governmental purposes and must be held in compliance with the open meetings law. That presumption can be rebutted under some circumstances, and we can talk about that. But that's a clear, bright line test. The analysis gets a little more complicated, however, because the courts have held that the number of members who are present isn't necessarily a majority. You can have less than a majority constitute an actual number sufficient to cause a meeting to occur. The way the courts have addressed that is that it's sufficient if the number of people present are sufficient to determine the body's course of action. So using the city council as an example, 8 members of the city council are a quorum. 4 members of a quorum can determine the outcome of a matter at a meeting because it takes 5 to approve, it takes 5 of 8 to approve a measure. So the numbers test you need to be aware that it's not just a majority. If there are enough people present to actually determine the outcome of a vote at a committee or a commission or the council, you have sufficient numbers. That's the first part of the test. Do you have enough people present to cause you to be having a meeting for purposes of the law? The second part of the test is whether or not you're discussing or deciding or gathering information about governmental business. So the law is not restricted to situations where we're actually taking formal action on things. Even a field trip to a particular location to gather information about something that the city is working on can be considered a meeting. Information gathering can be considered a meeting. The test is fairly broad in terms of what it means to be doing governmental business. If you're discussing a matter that's before the city, or before your committee, or before the council, or if you're gathering information about that together in sufficient numbers, that's a meeting. A few kind of special cases we can talk about to help illustrate this. There's something called a walking quorum. You can have a walking quorum when you have a series of meetings where each individual meeting wouldn't be with enough people to meet the numbers test, but when you put them together, it would. So in other words, if one person talks to another person and then another person, then another person, pretty soon you have enough numbers to constitute a meeting, and that's called a walking quorum. That can get really complicated with email, which is something we'll talk about in a little bit. There's a kind of meeting I call the watering hole meeting. That happens when a group gathers at a time and a place other than a noticed regular special meeting to discuss governmental business. I call it a watering hole meeting because it might be, hey, let's go to the coffee shop or the bar or something after a meeting. If you're going there to discuss governmental business, it's a meeting. If you're not discussing governmental business, you don't meet the 2-part test. But remember, if you've got a majority, there's a legal presumption that it's a meeting, even if you're not discussing governmental business. You could rebut that presumption if there were a challenge, if you were subject to prosecution for violating the open meetings law, and the case showed, well, you had enough people there, it's presumed a meeting, you could rebut the presumption by establishing that you weren't discussing governmental business, but it's a little dicey. The community organization meeting, this can be a challenge because this can happen when a group other than a city committee or city council group, for example, is having an event, for example. The Arts Council, the school board. You guys have actually had a meeting with the school board, and I assume you noticed that as a city council meeting. But sometimes you don't think about that, and you go to an event that somebody else is having, and again, if you have sufficient numbers, And if the issue that's being discussed is a matter that's a city issue, that's a meeting. So if you have to be mindful of going to events where you're likely to be present with other members of the council or other members of a committee that you're serving on. And it's easy to comply with the law for that kind of a meeting. If you know you're going to do it, just make sure it's properly noticed, and then you can do it. If you're going to meet with the city council, Chamber of Commerce, or the Arts Council, or some other organization, just notice it. Written correspondence. According to the Attorney General's office, written circulation of a paper or a hard copy document, which is largely a one-way flow of information, probably does not constitute a meeting. So, in other words, if one member of the council sends a letter to the other members of the council, and it's a one-way flow of information, and the other members of the council don't all reply, that's not a meeting. Email gets a lot more complicated, because as you know, you could send an email to the members of the council, and the next thing you know, people are replying. And now you have something that starts to look like a conversation, and the Attorney General's office says that could easily be considered a meeting. And you can have inadvertent violations if you're not careful. My impression is that this council does a pretty good job with that. I have really not seen at least anything that I've been copied on where there's a lot of discussion taking place by email. So good job with that, as far as I can tell. Social gatherings. A purely social or chance gathering that's not intended to avoid the open meeting law or doesn't involve the discussion of governmental business or doing governmental business, that's not a meeting. It's not subject to the open meeting law. Adequate notice. This is something that I work with the clerk's office on to make sure that our notice is adequate. It has to be specific and detailed enough to give members of the public and the news media, so that they would understand what the subject matter is. The Attorney General's guidance says that the public is entitled to the best notice that can be given at the time the notice is prepared. So we try and make sure people can see what it is that we're talking about at a meeting. Public comment periods at meetings are typically are authorized, but, and we've talked about this, they're limited to receiving information, not acting at it at the meeting. And the reason for that is the item's not on the agenda necessarily. If we're receiving public comment about something that's not on the agenda, we can hear about it, but we can't take action on it because it hasn't been noticed. Closed session issues. We've all seen closed sessions here. There needs to be a statutory basis to meet in closed session. If we are contemplating meeting in closed session, in other words, we know that that's a possibility, we need to give notice. You can have a spontaneous closed session where notice wasn't given. If during a meeting you recognize we need to talk about this in closed session, we have a legal right to do so because there's a statutory basis for doing that. You can then go into closed session and have that discussion. But then there are limits on when you can reconvene and take action in open session. Generally, you can't come back into open session after you've gone into closed session unless the notice has given public notice that that's something you're going to do. Voting should generally be done in open session unless the vote is an integral part of what's authorized to be done in closed session. In other words, if voting in open session would undermine the authorized closed session discussion, you can vote in closed session. And many of you have been in meetings where we've talked about that. We're in closed session. Can we vote on this in closed session? Why or why not? And we do a pretty good job with that. As I said, there are a couple of articles attached to the materials that you can find on the website. One is an article published by the League of Wisconsin Municipalities regarding the open meetings law. The Department of Justice Compliance Guide is also available at the Department of Justice website, and that's a pretty useful guide. Any questions about the open meetings law? Hearing none, talk about the ethics law. So the ethics laws that govern local officials in Wisconsin, or in, we'll keep it to Stoughton, we'll find them in two places. One is in Section 2-2 of the Code of Ordinances. We also have Section 19.59 of the Wisconsin statutes. And we have a criminal statute, Chapter 946. The first prohibition that's fairly straightforward is that it relates to the use of an office for private gain. And what the law says is that public officials are prohibited from using their offices to obtain anything of substantial value for the private benefit of themselves, their immediate family, or organizations with which they are associated. I'll give you a couple of examples of where this can get a little complicated. One example is that this rule does not neatly apply or does not necessarily apply to actions affecting a whole class of similarly situated interests in which you as an elected official have the same interest that somebody else has. So for example, we rebuild a street, you live on the street, and the city's going to specially assess everybody on the street. Everyone on the street's in the same boat you are. You have a right as an elected official to participate in the discussion and the vote on whether the city should pursue that special assessment. Another example, there's a proposed development activity in your neighborhood, and you and the rest of your neighbors are affected by that in some way. Yes, that affects you maybe a little differently than someone who lives in a different neighborhood, but your interest is not unique. Your interest is shared by the others in the neighborhood, and so you don't have a unique conflict of interest under those circumstances, and you can certainly participate and vote on that sort of thing. The other thing the question that I get quite often comes up in the context of organizations, because many people who serve on city councils are very engaged in the community, and they have relationships with lots of community organizations. The rules about whether or not your relationship to an organization triggers a conflict of interest are, you really have to look carefully at the details. So if you are a volunteer for an organization, if you may have contributed to them financially, that doesn't mean that the conflict of interest rules apply. If, on the other hand, you're on the board of directors, they do. So if you have questions about that, we can answer those. No one is allowed to give. Public officials are not willing to accept anything of value if it could reasonably be expected to influence their vote or official action, or be considered as a reward for official action. Abstaining from action. The Government Accountability Board, which doesn't exist anymore, but the old GAB, recommended that when you have a conflict of interest that does prevent you from taking action on a matter where you would have a legal conflict, that you should not only abstain from voting, but you should not participate in the debate and the deliberation on the matter. What I've seen people do is that I've seen some people actually get up from their council seat and sit in the audience section if there's something that the council is discussing that clearly involves their personal interests and they have a conflict. I've seen that taken, and I'm not saying you have to do that, but certainly you shouldn't be participating in the deliberation and voting on something if you do have a conflict of interest. Private interests in public contracts are something to be very careful about, because violation is a felony, Class C felony. And this one's tricky, because what it says is that you as a public official, you can't participate in making the contract in your official capacity if you have a direct or indirect financial interest, so you couldn't vote on it. And you can't in your private capacity negotiate or bid for enter into a contract if you have the authority, if you would be able to participate in your public capacity. So there is an exception for contracts that involve $15,000 or less per year. But if you're a business person in the city, for example, and you're doing business with the city, you need to keep that under that $15,000 limit to avoid criminal liability under the statute. Um, Officials in the city have the right to apply to the City Ethics Board for an advisory opinion. If you have a question about whether you have a conflict or what your obligations are, requests must be in writing, and they must provide all the material facts associated with the issue. If you request and receive an advisory opinion, then following that opinion is deemed to be prima facie evidence of intent to comply with the law and would provide a good defense if yours ever a claim that you violated the ethics laws. And those are largely confidential. The Ethics Board is not allowed to make a an advisory opinion requested public unless you either consent to that, or if it's redacted so that your identity is protected, or they can make it public if someone asks for an advisory opinion and then they start making statements about what the opinion says, or if they purport to make public parts of the opinion, then the opinion can be released. There is, again, a detailed discussion of the ethics laws in the materials that you're welcome to take a look at. I'm going to skip parliamentary procedure because we all are very good about parliamentary procedure here. Public records law, I will just urge you all to use your City of Stoughton email accounts for all communications on city business. Do not do city business on your personal email. I would strongly recommend that you not use your personal email accounts for engaging in city business, because if you do that, you're now potentially opening up your personal email to public records scrutiny, public records law inquiries and the like. And we've all seen too much about email in the last couple of years. So use your city email account. And you are a custodian of your own records. So if, for example, you are using your personal email account and you have city records on those, you're responsible for all aspects of them, including record retention requirements and responding to requests for records and so on. The nice thing about using your city email accounts is if we get a public records request and we need to do a search for records, we can use our computer technology to search everything. And we don't have to call each of you individually and say, please search your personal email to find emails about this or about that. And I think that's enough for one night.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions or comments for Attorney Dragney while we've got him here and this is all fresh in our mind? Alderperson Boersma.
Just one, and that is if a group gets together and notices that there's going to be a meeting, and even it's like an informal meeting, are there any requirements for minutes or documentation of that meeting?
Great question. So there certainly are requirements relating to accessibility and the public having an opportunity to be there. I honestly don't know if you're required to have minutes for kind of an informal meeting of a group of a committee, for example, where you're actually discussing business. I would say, without looking further, I would say follow the committee's practice with respect to minutes. If the committee keeps minutes, keep minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for Attorney Dragney? Hey,
And by the way, minutes don't have to be verbatim transcripts. They could be, meeting was called to order at such and such a time. These were the issues that were discussed. Meeting ended at such and such a time. So it doesn't have to be a verbatim transcript of everything that's said. There needs to be a record of what issues were discussed. If any votes were taken, that has to be recorded.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
was talking about
good.
an informal meeting.
Yeah. And so, for example, let's say you had a meeting to do a field trip somewhere to look at something. I suppose you would document that through, the meeting was called to order at such and such time. We went to this location and viewed the site, and then we adjourned. That could be your minutes.
Thank you, Matt.
Alderperson Truul.
A quick question about after a meeting is adjourned. What are the rules in terms of any members of that committee continuing to meet, talking, doing things about items, perhaps discussing items that were taken up as a part of it? Can you?
That would be an unlawful meeting.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so when you adjourn, you know, talk about the kids and the weather, and then go home.
I think that's probably the one area that occasionally is probably lax in this.
Well, everybody, you know, wants to keep talking about stuff, so if you want to keep talking about it, just don't adjourn yet. Stay in session.
Yeah, good reminder. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, we have asked Matt to continue the conversation with Council President Swadley had asked a couple of questions about the RDA and how appointments were made in April. Seems like a long time ago, but in April. So he did put together a memo that's in your packet and would like to discuss that under a presentation regarding procedure for appointments to the Redevelopment Authority by Attorney Dragney.
Okay, so this is a little complicated. The first thing to note is that we have an inconsistency between our city ordinance and state law with respect to the composition and method for appointing members to the Redevelopment Authority. And my conclusion is that we don't really have an option to do it differently than what the statute provides for. This is an area where the statute, I think, controls. And under the statute, the process for appointments to the Redevelopment Authority is that the mayor appoints, subject to confirmation by a vote of 4/5 of the city council. And that's pretty unusual. I can't think of another body where you need to have a 4/5 vote to approve an appointment. Suggesting to me that the legislature has made a determination that the Redevelopment Authority is a body where the members who are appointed should be broadly supported by members of the council. So unlike the state statute, our ordinance seems to allow confirmation of RDA members by simple majority vote. Although I think our ordinance does also provide for appointment by the mayor subject to confirmation by the council. So the mayor has the prerogative to nominate, the council has the prerogative to approve or not approve. Kind of like Supreme Court justices in the Senate. President nominates and the Senate advises and consents. The other thing that's different between our ordinance and the statute is that our ordinance provides for an alternate, and the statute does not. And so that's something that's outside the scope of the statute. So we suggest that the city correct its ordinances. You don't actually even have to have an ordinance on the RDA. The state statute provides everything you need. So you don't have to have any ordinance if you don't want one. If you do have an ordinance, we should make sure it follows the statute. So I expect there might be questions then about what happens when people are appointed to the Redevelopment Authority outside of the legal process. And turns out that the answer isn't what I expected entirely. One thing the law seems to make fairly clear is that people who are serving on the RDA, well, they would likely be considered de facto officers such that their actions and the RDA's actions would not be subject to collateral attack by third parties. So if the RDA takes action, some third party wouldn't be able to come in and say that action was illegal and you should void it because the people who are serving on the RDA were improperly appointed. So the key question in my mind is whether these folks would be considered de facto officers. And all the law requires to make an officer a de facto officer is that the person claiming the office is in possession of the office and is performing its duties and claims to be such officer under color of an election or appointment. So there needs to be an election or appointment that happened that they're serving under. And if that's the case, then they would be deemed, even if there was an impropriety in the appointment process, they would be deemed a de facto officer, and their acts and the acts of the RDA would still be valid. It is possible to have someone who was improperly appointed. It is possible for someone to commence what's called a quo warranto action and ask a judge to remove someone from office on the grounds that they are not entitled to be holding that office. But it looks like such a claim could only be brought by someone who would have standing to bring the claims. In other words, someone who can demonstrate that if the appointment had not been made improperly, that they might be serving in office. So just any general member of the general public would not have a right to assert that kind of a claim. That's the only way, the only mechanism, other than the usual removal procedure that applies. I mean, the city council always has the authority to remove people from commissions that the city council appointed people to. I mean, you always have that power. But absent that kind of action, a de facto officer could only be removed from office by a quo warranto action by someone who has a claim that he or she should be the rightful holder of that office, for example. So that's where we stand.
So Matt and I talked a little bit about, so what does that mean? And, it can mean all sorts of things, I guess, but basically what it means is that the council could choose to amend the RDA's ordinance to make the changes in the alternate that is identified there, as well as, I've forgotten already, what was the other?
The nomination and voting requirements.
The nomination and voting.
Four-fifths
The
vote.
four-fifths vote. Or the ordinance could simply be deleted, as Matt said, and work underneath the state statute, which is how it's governed anyway. What does that mean for the folks that were appointed by council to the RDA? Simply means that they're serving as de facto members. Am I using the right word?
Mm-hmm.
De facto
Yes.
members of
Yes.
that, and they still have all voting rights and every other right as all the other members do. So that's up.
That's my understanding.
Correct. Thank you. Alderperson Engelberger.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a question, Matt, regarding the four-fifths. I don't know if that's something from 1836 or whatever, but it seems to me that if there's any division in a body, that you wouldn't be able to appoint people because you wouldn't have the votes. So I don't understand where the four-fifths comes from. I mean, there's some things that require two-thirds under parliamentary procedure, but
I've never seen it.
four-fifths just doesn't make sense to me. I've never heard of it any other place.
I haven't either. I was surprised. And yeah, you really could have a situation where, it was tough to find someone that four-fifths people could agree to.
Yeah. Especially in Congress.
True. All right. Thank you, Matt. Are there questions, though, before I don't want to just go past this if there are questions? All right. Seeing none. Thank you. We'll move on to the minutes and reports are on your agenda as listed. Public comment period. We do have a person registered to speak at the public comment period. Peggy Varigan is here, and if you'd like to come to the microphone, please, Peggy. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Peggy Varigan. I'm the chair of the Landmarks Commission. And at our last Landmarks meeting in May, Tim Swadley, who's our council rep, asked that I come here this evening and update you about what we've been doing, specifically regarding the mowing plow, manned Stoughton trailers, highway trailer, building, whatever you choose to call it. I'll start by telling you that in April, at our meeting in April, we had Alders Greg Jensen, Matt Bartlett, and Sid Borsma attend and have a discussion with us about this building. and its potential for historic designation. So part of the discussion was about landmarking only the blacksmith shop component of the building. And at that time, it was explained that the commission cannot evaluate one part of a building. A building must be evaluated as a whole. Just because we can't landmark half a building or a piece of a building, we can't cherry pick what part of a building we want to landmark and ignore the rest of the building. That's just sort of an arbitrary review. So further, our discussion talked about how removing a portion of the building may affect eligibility. So after that discussion, Alderperson Boersma asked the Landmarks Commission to formally evaluate the building for local landmark eligibility and National Register eligibility. This is in part an information gathering exercise. Having this information available to you will help you make better decisions about the buildings and the property. So commissioners were directed to review the existing report about the building and be prepared to discuss it at the next meeting, which was our May meeting. And we had a discussion about eligibility. We used our landmarks criteria that's in our ordinance to evaluate the property. The consensus was that the building met 4 of the 6 eligibility requirements in the ordinance, and a vote to confirm these findings was taken with unanimous agreement that the building is eligible for local landmark designation. At that same meeting, we voted to forward the report to the State Historic Preservation Office and ask them to evaluate the building for potential eligibility for the State Register and the National Register of Historic Places. Eligibility and listing in the National Register is the only thing that will allow a developer to use the rehabilitation tax credits, which is a 40% credit on eligible expenses for a historic building. So it's important to know if the building is eligible for the National Register and whether or not someone might be able to use the tax credits. So we did that. We sent the information on to the state office, and they are currently evaluating the building. So that's where we are right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Alderperson Jensen.
Peggy? I just, quick question on that, because I was at that meeting as well. With that tax credit that you're talking about, if the, and I know what the answer is, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows and hears it from you. If we were to go ahead and demo the trailer portion of the building and leave the back blacksmith, what would be the results?
It depends on when you do it and if the building is eligible for the National Register. If the building is eligible and you demo that part of the building, it will no longer be eligible. If the building is listed in the National Register, is sold to a private individual, they can do whatever they want with the building. Whether they'd be able to use the tax credits or not is another question that I don't have the answer to. But demolition of any part of the building is done at the risk of not being able to use the tax credits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And Peggy was the only one we had registered tonight to speak at the public comment period. Our consent agenda tonight consists of minutes of May 9th, 2017, the Common Council meeting, and minutes of the May 16th special Common Council meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
There's a motion by Jensen. Is there a second? Second. Second by Johnson. Would any alderperson wish to remove a portion or amend those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. We have no old business this evening. Moving on to new business begins with Resolution 72 of 2017. This comes from our Finance Committee. Alderperson O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Resolution 72, 2017, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to allocate $20,000 from the Park Development Fund for the construction of a $60,000 pickleball complex in Mant Park contingent on the remainder of $40,000 being raised by the Stoughton Lions Clubs. And the Finance Committee recommends 4-0, and I move to approve.
Motion by Connor, second by Engelberger. Comments? Alderperson O'Connor.
Pretty much self-explanatory. As I understand it, the construction wouldn't begin until after all the money had been raised.
Correct. Comments or questions? Alderperson Bartlett.
Yeah, I'm also on the Parks and Rec Committee, and we voted for approval of this 5-0. I think this is a great partnership with the Lions Club. They're paying $40,000 out of $60,000, so I definitely support it.
Thank you. Further comments? We'll vote by roll call.
Hirsch.
Aye.
Swadley.
Aye.
Boersma.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Reeves.
Aye.
Majewski.
Aye.
Engelberger.
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
Truul.
Aye.
O'Connor. Bartlett.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Resolution 66 of 2017 also comes from our Finance Committee. Alderperson O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Resolution 66, 2017, authorizing the 2017 Section 5310 subrecipient agreement between the City of Madison and the City of Stoughton related to grant to purchase 2 minivans for shared taxi service. Finance Committee approved 4-0. And I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by O'Connor, second by Alderperson Majewski. Alderperson O'Connor.
This is an agreement with the City of Madison. We had a few questions at the Finance Committee that the city attorney and/or Tammy Laborde looked into and got resolution to, and so we're recommending approval. The city's responsibility is $13,400 on a $90,000 purchase.
Correct, and these are hugely important to replace some well-used handicapped vans for our shared ride taxi service. Comments or questions? Alderperson Engelberger.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm all in favor of this. The only question I have, I mean, this is a good service we provide for the community, but I guess the question I have is with regard to the contract that's currently in place with, when does that come up for renewal for the provider that provides this service?
The end of this year. The end of this year. So Finance Director Laborde has started looking into putting together those RFPs to get sent out.
The reason I bring that up, and I think it's been brought up in the past, when shortly after we signed the last agreement, and I don't know how long ago that was, we brought in a new service provider, and what they did was immediately lay off all of the employees and ask who wanted to be rehired. And when they rehired the people, they were at a substantially less wage. And as far as I remember, that was unknown at the time that we approved that agreement. I'm hoping that something like that doesn't happen this next time, because that was a real shame for the employees that were part of this service. It's a great service that we provide, and we should be paying some for some of the vehicles here, but we need to do a better job of looking at that contract next time.
Sure. Part of what happened is that the longtime owner of the shared ride taxi service did not receive that federal grant according to the criteria as updated by the federal government. So that was part of that deal. Alderperson Hirsch. No? All right. Alderperson Majewski.
As that contract was, the last contract, I was part of that, and that is, really our hands are quite tied on how that is selected. It's pretty much dictated by state on how we score and select the vendor. Don't have a whole lot of say in it. There's some very specific questions that are asked, and then they're required to have certain things in it. And as far as how we go about leveraging is it's very constricted. So if we can in the future, I highly doubt it, unfortunately. But, you know, we're looking at a service that is paid for through federal and state monies. So we don't have a whole lot of say-so in exactly how that money is being distributed.
Thank you. Further comments? Alderperson Bartlett.
I also think this is a great thing. My questions are to the existing vehicles. Are we required to dispose of them? Are they in good enough condition that we could expand the service and keep those one or two of those vans? Because I'm always hearing about transportation issues locally, and we're expanding our assisted living facilities, so there's going to be more need for them. Is there a possibility to keep those and expand to another driver or two? And are they worth more than $5,000, so we don't give that 80% back to the federal government, that we make use of what we have from those past grants, I guess?
We'll bring we'll bring the vans in and have our mechanics take a look at them. But what I'm hearing from one of the drivers themselves is it's time that they were changed out for new. And we'll continue to write for more grants, as we do every year, so that we can have that very potential. Thank you. Further comments? Alderperson Alderperson Johnson.
Thank you. I know I asked a lot of questions on this prior, but are these like vans that people can call up and they get a free ride to Madison? Or a subsidize, or what?
No,
what does
the
it?
shared ride taxi service that the city of Stoughton has been, and I'll say very fortunate recipient of these grants for about 40 years now, if I'm right. It's for the city of Stoughton. They do go minimally outside into the townships, not far, and they do pay there's a fee. It's a very reduced cost. I know when we first had the new contract, we were able to work with the provider at identifying, is it a trip if I stop at the bank on the way to the grocery store? Is that 2 rides? Do I have to pay for 2 rides? And of course, we were able to work with them to allow that to be, that's 1. You needed to stop at the bank. If you stay there for hours, then of course it's a different story. But if it's just a quick stop on the way to the grocery store, that's one ride. So we're able to work with them minimally. It does not provide service into Madison, though.
Okay. And then the other question is this part of the other taxis that are in town, or how do they get this share ride?
Yep, this is all the same. This is what we have in the city of Stoughton, is a shared ride taxi service.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Further comments? All right, all those in favor, we do have a motion by Alderperson O'Connor, second by Majewski, to approve Resolution 66 of 2017. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no? Motion carries. Thank you. That means a great deal to our community to continue this service. Resolution 73 of 2017 comes from Finance. Alderperson O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Resolution 73, 2017, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to enter into an agreement with Harvest Farms LLC for the second phase of construction of the Nordic Ridge Plat. The Finance Committee met tonight, voted to approve unanimously. I move to approve.
Motion by O'Connor. Is there a second?
Second?
I'm sure second by Bartlett. Thank you. Alderperson O'Connor.
This is a agreement with the developer in the city to develop the park down there, and it includes a splash pad and park shelter.
Thank you. Planning
Rodney's
Director
here.
Shield.
That could probably enter some questions. Or
I can just expand on it a little bit. This is the second phase of the Nordic Ridge development. This agreement is structured much like the very first phase was to outline the public improvements that are part of the responsibility of the developer to install. The caveat to this one is it really takes a cooperative approach to improve the park, to include, as was mentioned, a splash pad and a park shelter at the same time as the park is graded and improved as part of the second phase of development. In the agreement, it outlines that the city will collect from the developer up front all of the park improvement fees related to the entire development. Normal practice would be that park improvement fees come in as building permits are taken out. you'll recognize that there's approximately 160 lots, I believe, or so in the development as a whole. Actually, more than that. But nonetheless, this park is being built as part of Phase 2, and this development might actually be built over a number of 6 or 7 phases potentially. This allows the city to have the park shelter and the splash pad constructed up front as part of this project. The development agreement outlines that there's additional improvements that the developer is taking on that normally wouldn't be required of them and are funding on their own, and I'll just highlight a few of them. As part of the park layout, there is a soccer field, so there's some internal drainage that needs to be appropriately installed to allow for the crown field there. There's a shared use path that will traverse across the entire parkland, and there's also some modified parking areas that along Whole Avenue will accommodate some parking for the park facility itself. The park shelter and the splash pad has been discussed with the Parks and Rec Committee for a number of months. The concepts, while not finalized, are attached as exhibits to the document, Exhibit A and B. What the agreement outlines is they'll be forwarding to us what they believe are plans and specifications that the city would deem appropriate for bidding of the entire splash pad and building construction. Once the city has received bids that are less than the $392,000 outlined in the agreement, then we as a city would proceed with that public construction project. The $392,000 represent, maybe it's 396, use 392, but essentially that number is a result of the entire park improvement fee requirement. I believe that's $242,000, and the city had committed, as you'll recall, at a previous meeting, an additional $150,000 to be contributed to the park shelter and splash pad facility. So that's what the agreement attempts to outline for us. It indicates that if we don't receive bids less than the 392, we'd have to evaluate what we do moving forward. But the intent is to try to move forward with a building and splash pad for less dollars than that. Future phases, we'll have another development agreement. Just for council clarification, this entire plat was platted. These lots have already been created, they're just not improved, and this is just the next phase of improvement for these particular lots.
Thank you, Rodney. Comments or questions? Alderperson Hirsch.
And maybe Tom, can you tell me where the extra, because this was supposed to be like a joint project, can you tell me where the extra money that the developer has offered to add to this project to make these splash pad, where that fits into the 392?
Well, what they're contributing to is the creation of the trail, the parking lot, and the special grading for the sports field and the drainage. All of that is coming from their own personal money that's not part of the park development fees.
That's outlined in the agreement as additional improvements that they're committing to do.
Okay.
In addition to the plans and specs, developing the plans and specs for the building and the splash pad in preparation of the bid package that the city would ultimately bid out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that again, and I would like to extend my gratitude to the developer for putting in almost $116,000 additional money into this park above and beyond what they're required to do by our own ordinances. And that means a lot. I think that shows their commitment to our community and their commitment to that park and that development. So thank you.
Right. And that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Absolutely. Thank you.
It's a joint effort. Thanks.
Right. I have Alderperson Jensen and then Engelberger.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to make a comment. I wanted to thank staff and the committees, Parks and Rec, Planning, for working on this so diligently over the past few months. I think it is a great project. I really like seeing this cooperation, and I want to thank them for the hard work that they did.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alderperson Jensen. Alderperson Engelberger.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple questions, Rodney. You had mentioned the 154,000 that we're authorizing here tonight. Did you say earlier that we had already authorized 154,000 before, or no?
150,000 of it was added to your borrowing, the borrowing.
Okay, this isn't an extra.
I'll get it up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure this isn't an extra 154,000, right?
Yeah, the additional $4,000-ish is anticipated to come out of the park budget.
And then the other, the other question I had was, has any of this come to planning yet?
No, the
Like, for the
building and
park?
site plan has to come before the planning commission.
How about the parking?
Parking's already been dealt with through the public works, because it's in the
That's-
public right of
Okay,
way.
and that's the one thing, I wanted to just maybe ask the chief about the parking there. If I remember right, it's angled parking, right?
Yeah, yep,
I guess my question would be to the chief, have we ever, or to Rodney also, have we ever looked into backing in parallel, or backing in angle parking? I don't know if you've seen, they have that like in Fitchburg. There's an area where you'd back into the stall at an angle.
Yep.
And, I mean, to me, that seems like a very safe situation or a more safe situation if you're gonna have angle parking. We've talked a little bit about angle parking downtown.
It is a little safer, but in one regard, and not so safe in another regard, because in the motion of parking, you're actually starting from the opposite direction, and you're going across traffic to back in there, versus just pulling in. Yeah, there's you have your backing out concerns, but I did review the plans Rodney forwarded along on how the parking would be constructed there, and I don't see any issues with it the way it is right now. Actually, I don't think we would have any ordinances that would prohibit anybody from backing into a parallel or a angle stall like that, but probably not very advisable given the location.
Well, I mean, I've seen it, it's kind of a newer thing out there where they're actually using it in some areas, and to me, it seems like, I would think it's a little bit safer than straight-on angle parking as far as backing out, but the thing is, like, if you compare it to parallel parking, I mean, parallel parking, you still have to back in, and
Right.
you'd be doing the same thing here, except you'd be at an angle, so.
Well, and we thought that the angle parking would be safer than parallel parking, plus that allows for a lot more parking that can be established. Do they do that in a reverse fashion? I mean, do they turn the angle stalls in the opposite direction?
Yeah, so I mean, when you're
Sure.
driving along the road, instead of the angle being turning into them, they're the other way. So you have to go forward and then back into it. It's just like parallel parking, except you're
Right.
backing into an angle stall.
Okay. I guess it's something in the future that we can take a look at.
I think it'd be a safe situation
Sure.
to check out with public safety and just take a look at it for certain areas.
Sure.
Sure, thank you. Alderperson Hirsch and then Johnson.
Rodney, correct me if wrong with Alderperson Engelberger's comment with the parking. Wasn't the parking, and maybe the developer too, you widen the road a little bit so when you pull out, you're not pulling out into traffic, didn't we?
Yeah.
Wasn't that discussed, and wasn't that
There's
the
a
way it ended up?
Yeah, there was a modification to the plan. In essence, the parking area actually moves into the public park land. So there's a 66-foot wide right-of-way in the whole avenue. The parking actually extends into the park property to a certain extent to allow for enough room where a backing vehicle wouldn't officially have to back into the lane of traffic. They could back out into the area behind the adjacent car and not impede the adjacent lane. Now, that'd take a little bit of skill, but it gives that additional, I'll say 8 feet behind the parked vehicles to allow for that maneuver to occur to minimize that conflict there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alderperson Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I was in Baraboo, and now I look at how the cities are set up, and they have something very similar, straight on one end and at an angle, and I'm like, I get so excited, I'm like, we're gonna do that. So I was on the Public Works, and one of the things that I was curious about is I know we were talking about the slots on the street. How many is that, Rodney?
I'm sorry, I don't remember, but I believe there was 28 stalls on the street,
Okay.
as opposed to about half of that if it was parallel parking.
and that's great, but one of my concerns is that it still might not be enough. And I'm sure you guys have all gone over that, but if you have a soccer game, you have how many opponents, and the mom and dads might come separately. And I just didn't know if that was thought of as the amount, and if there was any, and, you know, I don't know, you don't want to put any parking lot in the park, but I don't know if that is going to be an issue. I'm sure the people that are living on the park block don't want to have people cutting through their yards to get, because it just seems like 24 is not a lot for having a splash pad, soccer, and actually like a shelter if somebody wants to have a party there too. So that's one of my concerns about the whole thing too.
Well, certainly it's a balance, trying to figure out how to utilize the land that's available for the use. A couple of things come into play here. It's really a residential neighborhood. Another thing that's somewhat unique in this situation is the park's going to be fully improved before the adjacent parcels are built on. So for those folks that don't want the parking in front of those, in front of their homes, at least they'll know the park and what the aspects of the park will entail before they move into that property. In addition, there is a shared use path that runs east to west through the entire parcel and opens up to the next street to the west, if you will, to allow for a pedestrian path into the back side of the park land as another opportunity for parking.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Tom,
I just wanted to say,
if you would come to the mic, please. Thank you.
there's 31 spots in that parking area.
Okay,
Bob just checked on that, so that mattered.
great, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions?
Me?
Sure. Sure, Alderperson Johnson. I'm sorry, Sid, I didn't see you. Next.
I just wondered if there's any accommodations for bikes and, in that.
Well, the shared use path is a 10-foot wide asphalt path that will go east to west across the entire development. So that is certainly accommodations for bikes as well. The sidewalk that runs parallel to the park, adjacent to the angle parking, is wider in width, so that will allow for a shared use, a bike route as well on a shared path there.
So bikes will be allowed on that sidewalk area?
They'll be allowed certainly on the shared use path, which runs east to west. That's an asphalt path. There will be on-road accommodations, not designated lanes, but there are on-road opportunities for bikes to occur there and drive there.
All right, thank you. Alderperson Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. This sounds like a really great park. I'm just going to do a shout out to District 4 that maybe we want a splash pad and things like that. And that I know it's a new development, but living in an older part of town, I know I'm going to get the riverfront down there, but I just want to be, people be conscious of, you know, the smaller, older areas that we want to have some fun new stuff too.
Absolutely.
District 2 or District 4?
Oh, I'm sorry, District 2. I moved to District 2. Really great.
District 4 will gladly take the splash pad. We'll send it over.
No, thank
The
you.
dueling districts, you guys be nice now. Getting a nice new pickleball court.
Yes.
So there, we'll have good things in all sorts of our community. So without further questions, we'll vote by roll call.
Swadley.
Aye.
Boersma.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Reeves.
Aye.
Majewski.
Aye.
Engelberger.
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
Truul.
Aye.
O'Connor.
Aye.
Bartlett.
Aye.
Hirsch.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
That motion carries. Thank you. And again, a thank you to Bob and Laura DeVork for putting in that additional cash to make it happen.
Thank you, yay!
Resolution 74 of 2017 comes from our Finance Committee. Alderperson O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Resolution 74, 2017, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to approve the proposal to develop a relocation plan and provide relocation services with Core, Inc. for 2431 County Highway A, Stoughton, Wisconsin. Finance Committee met tonight and approved it unanimously, and I move for approval.
Second.
Motion by O'Connor, second by Majewski. Alderperson O'Connor.
This allocates $13,500 for the purpose of working with the family in the residence where the Public Works garage will be going.
thank you. A little further description if you'd like. I know that either Rodney or why don't we turn it to Attorney Dragney.
Just to provide a little more information, as you know, the city is pursuing the acquisition of that single-family home owned by the Kirbys where the future public works facility needs to go. One required step in the process is to provide relocation assistance to them. And so this is a contract to provide for those services. I was asked at the last meeting if I've been in touch with the Kirbys, and I have had a chance to talk to Mr. Kirby. And we had a good conversation. He understands what the process looks like, and I had every indication that he's hoping for a successful outcome for him and for the city, and is just anxious to get started.
All right, thank you. Questions? Alderperson Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Kirby, for stepping up and doing that. I just would like to have been notified that came through, because we got this on the agenda and I didn't know at all what was moving, or what that we were approving for the moving.
The relocation, that this contract would be on the agenda, or?
Yes, that it was moving forward. I didn't know that it was accepted and everything like that, so.
It hasn't been accepted yet.
It hasn't?
I'm not sure what yeah, so this is simply an agreement with the consultant who will provide services to the Kirbys.
If.
That. What do you
Right?
mean, if?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean.
So the city has already adopted a relocation, a resolution initiating the process. So the process is moving forward. Will include the development of a relocation plan and providing relocation assistance and other steps in the process. So I think the council has approved moving forward.
Right, and Attorney Dragney has spoken with the Kirby family, and they are interested in working with the council to move forward. Part of the process and what this group will help us do is to identify the next steps in helping them identify a new property or a new home to move to, help them with relocation. Yep, Alderperson Majewski.
I think you're confused. No offer has been made. This is just to set up. It's required because we are going through this condemnation. We are required to offer these services.
Okay.
We have nobody on city staff that has that expertise. So this is the first step towards doing that.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other comments or questions regarding this contract? Council President Swadley.
Thank you, Your Honor. And maybe Attorney Dragney could kind of summarize some of the future steps, such as.
Sure. So in addition to the relocation assistance that this contract will get moving forward, we've also asked for an appraisal. I expect to receive that within the next week or two. We will then kind of wait for the relocation plan to be completed, and once that's done, we will provide both the relocation plan and the appraisal report that we're having done to the Kirbys for their review. They'll have a right to have their own appraisal done, if they wish, at our cost. I think there'll be some dialogue with them about our relocation plan and the services they need. And so there'll be kind of two tracks. One will be the relocation discussion and process, and the other will be the discussion with them about what the city will pay for their property. And so we're hoping that both of those discussions go well from the perspective of both the Kirbys and the city. And again, at this point, everything seems to be going well.
Okay, Council President Swadley, and then Engelberger.
And just one additional thing for those council members that weren't in attendance at Finance. One of the things I asked for is an updated summary of our approved borrowing, so we know where we are on the monies that we borrowed and allocated, not only for this project, but for other projects that we've approved in the past, to make sure that we're within the budget amount that we approved the bonds for at the last meeting. And you can expect that hopefully it'll be at the next Finance Committee meeting, but if not, at a future meeting.
Thank you. Alderperson Engelberger.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a question for the attorney. I'm assuming some of this is going to be in closed session in the future
Yes.
with
When
negotiating a property or whatever?
Once we're actually discussing purchase price,
Mhm.
and there may be some other financial issues where we would need a closed session discussion, but we're not quite ready for that yet.
Okay. The reason I ask is that when I was looking through here, I saw some of the information here, and it's just an example from what I understand of
Yes.
what they
Yes.
provide, and it looked like it was all the information. I'm going, this shouldn't really be in our packet, but I can see what it is now.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Further comments? Otherwise, we'll vote by roll. There's been a motion by Alderperson O'Connor, second by Alderperson Mieski to approve Resolution 74 of 2017.
Bartlett.
Aye.
Hirsch.
Aye.
Swadley.
Aye.
Boersma.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Reeves. Aye. Mieski.
Aye.
Engelberger.
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
Truul.
Aye.
O'Connor.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Resolution 75 of 2017 comes from our Planning Commission. I think Alderperson O'Connor got tired of talking for a while. So we'll go to Alderperson Truul.
Thank you, Your Honor. The Plan Commission brings forth Resolution 75-2017, approving conditional use permit request by Bob Feller, Iconica, to allow for institutional residential use, a senior assisted living facility at 2600 Jackson Street. Commission approved this unanimously, and I would move approval.
Second.
Motion by Truul, second by Engelberger. Alderperson Truul.
I hope you had a chance to take a look at the packet, the information on this project. While the west side of town the northwest side of town may not be getting a splash pad, I think we are getting one of the more attractive buildings that we possibly could have as a part of this senior independent living. And I think that's important to let people realize. We've referred to this a lot of times as a senior facility. The project as proposed is 79 units of senior independent living, and then 21-unit memory care center on the back. I know that for me personally, and I think for the Plan Commission, when we were reviewing the adjacent hotel and hearing about what was going to happen, that we were going to have this type of facility next to it, there were concerns. I think a number of us had concerns about how that was going to fit and how this was going to lay out. I think it's fair to say that the Plan Commission had many positive things to say about this layout. I think the developers have done a nice job of integrating this with the hotel that will be to the east of it, and also just breaking up the building, both from a site plan standpoint, doing some things, kind of opening up the memory care center, which is really on the north end or at the back end of the lot. And then from an architectural standpoint, coming off just a couple of days from Sit and Mai, the developer and the architects were clearly trying to capture some of the Scandinavian flair, trying to do what they could with breaking up roof lines. And I very honestly, I think this is an incredible model. That if the city could get more of these type of projects, I think we would be well suited. So I would encourage you to support it.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Council President Swadley.
Thank you, Your Honor. I certainly looked at the plan, watched the Planning Commission meeting, and I think that we have a quality developer and a quality project on this site. I don't know if I want to encourage too many more like it, based on some feedback that I received from the school district. It really isn't that beneficial to the district as a whole because it adds property value, which is one of the things that affects their state aid in their formula. But I do recognize that there is definitely a positive economic impact to the city. And I guess one thing I would like to see going forward is that we identify what that economic impact is in dollars, because I think that's important for not only us, but the community to know, and even for the school district. If it doesn't benefit them as far as adding students, it does benefit the fact that, people are coming into our community, and they're going to be living there, and they're going to have relatives coming to Stoughton and spending money there. And I think that's important for the community as a whole. And I also believe that going forward, we should have more financial information as far as what net new construction dollars are going to be available to the city to cover any potential costs for our city services that we're providing. An example would be police, fire, EMS, public works to these sites to make sure that when we're making these decisions from an economic standpoint, it makes sense for the city, because the criteria for the Planning Commission is different, I believe, than the criteria that the City Council should include some of that, but it also should include these other things. So I guess I'm just going to formally make this request now. I've made it in other projects in the past. I've been unsuccessful getting that information, but I'm hoping going forward that as a group, if we're all interested in that, that we'll push to get that, because I think that's important, because people in the community need to understand why the decisions are made and how it's going to affect the city as a whole.
Thank you. I know Alderperson Hirsch wants to speak, but I think Alderperson Truul would like to comment to that.
Thank you, Your Honor. And just as a clarification, again, given the fact that we had been, as a part of the master plan, had called out, or the developer had indicated a senior project, I want to clarify my comments just to make sure. I wasn't necessarily suggesting that we need 3 more of these senior independent living centers in our city. I think my comment really was directed at the fact that the way that they have integrated this into the site, the architecture, and the fact that it was, there was certainly concern, at least on my part, when we were hearing about a senior living type facility. The developers did talk about the kind of rates they're talking about. I mean, this is, these are going to be very nice units. They're going to be independent. Again, the 79 part on the front will have a boatload of amenities, trails, other things like that. And so I just wanted to clarify that in talking about this as a model, I was more from a standpoint of saying really the looks and the way that they've integrated the site. I think too often we get cookie cutter type projects that come in, and we are forced, in the immortal words of my friend and fellow city council person, Mr. Engelberger, looking for exemptions, looking for exclusions to try and figure things out. And the first things the developer comes to us is starts talking about all the things that the rules that we have to change to make the project go. This one, I think they did it right.
Thank you. Alderperson Hirsch.
Well, I guess there's a couple questions. One, it says 79 unit independent and assisted living. So how many of each do you know? Because are they going to be mixed on the same floor, or?
The back unit is the memory care unit.
No, but there's difference between independent and assisted living. Independent, you don't have people coming in and checking you and helping you, get around. So I was just wondering if those are going to be separated as well.
In the
Because
memo,
there's memory care, independent, and assisted living.
I think
There's
we
3
have
there.
someone who can help us right here. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you.
The units will all be designed the same.
Okay.
Ultimately, depending on who the resident is coming in and what services they need, they could be an assisted living resident or an independent living resident. The nice thing about the licensing with the state is we can be a certified RCAC and still allow any type of resident to come in with either any type of unit. So we've made some projections that it'll be kind of an equal split between both independent and assisted, but ultimately it'll be up to whatever the community needs.
And can you just go over, because Scott said it's going to be a very nice, and
I'm sorry, I've had a question. Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, sorry. I'm Rachel Piantka. I'm with Tuca Properties, the developer for the project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess when Scott said it's a very nice property and has lots of amenities, and my concern is, will our seniors in Stoughton be able to afford it based on their retirement and Medicare? I mean, or is it going to be too high end that our seniors will not be able to afford it or use the Medicare payments and what they have?
Sure. The market study that we had done to decide whether the project would be a viable solution for us showed that, or it looked into what the incomes are in the area and what that typically would look like for if you were to, what typical incomes are and if you were to sell a home at the rates in the area, and typically how many years someone may be living in a senior property like this. So we felt like everything combined and the rents that we're charging are comparable with other facilities in the market and would be what residents need. So I can't speak to any particular person, but I feel good that it should be in line with everything else. We certainly are not charging above and beyond, even though we do hope that you appreciate the property and it's.
Can you give like an average, what you would call, what it would be for like a one-bedroom?
Sure. The independent units will start somewhere around $3,000 a month, and then the assisted will be maybe $3,800 a month. That includes some basic services. You have access to a 24/7 nurse. You have a lot of community life programming already done, other events you can participate in that includes transportation. We'll have a van on site for the residents to take them throughout the community to various places. So there are some services built into that compared to a traditional market rate apartment. And then with the assisted, the increase in cost is primarily the meals. So you'll have 3 meals a day if you're, as an assisted living resident.
Thank you. Alderperson Boersma.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm glad you're here to present this for us tonight. I noticed when I looked at the minutes from this particular meeting that it did address the issue of noise a little bit, and then it did address the issue of lighting. And basically what it said was there's no changes anticipated for lighting or something like that. I wondered what was proposed and what those changes are going to be or not going to be, or I don't understand.
I think you might be talking about the next CUP, Sid.
Hi, I'm Josh Stans, the architect on the project. Yeah, I think that is the actual Tractor Supply, the lighting issue. So,
okay,
not us.
Yep.
Right.
And so this will be. You've done a market analysis, or you've done an analysis, and do you feel like this project is necessary, or is going to fill up pretty quickly for Stoughton?
Yeah, we do. In particular on the independent living side, one of the things though that we really strive to create in our communities is that continuum of care, so that if you do move in as an independent living resident, you have that ability as your care increases to switch to assisted, or if you start to have memory problems, move into the memory care wing. One thing we've had a lot of feedback from our residents at other properties is knowing that if something comes up, if you have a couple move in and one needs to move to memory care, the other one can stay. So we really feel it's important to have everything. So while I know you have some new memory care in the area, I think we really wanted to have everything on one property anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderperson Majewski.
This has nothing to do with you yourself. I'm concerned that we have been seeing a lot of assisted living being built in the community as of late, and as part of that, I'm beginning to wonder about how it is taxing our EMS and our public safety officials. And I'd like to see in the future that we start considering that before we start having more of these units put in place in the city. I think there's kind of a hidden cost and a hidden drain that can come with these types of developments that we need to really start being concerned about.
We all need to stop getting older. That's what I'd agree. Alderperson Hirsch.
I'm gonna miss everybody.
Thank you. The only thing that I see missing in your design, I think it's really, goes pretty nice, but there isn't any, you have walking trails, but you don't have any like raised bed gardens. I've been to a few of those assisted living where they actually have raised bed gardens for people to actually grow their own vegetables and throughout the summer, and that was really a good activity that they actually enjoyed.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. We do have some plans. I don't know if they weren't maybe noted. Maybe, I don't think we got them drawn up on the landscape plan rate yet, but we do plan to have that.
Okay, thank you.
Alderperson Reeves.
I was just looking for clarification on, so is Iconica the developer? I'm just wondering who's doing the day-to-day operational, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yep, there's kind of three key parties involved. Tuca Properties, myself as the developer. Iconica will be the general contractor and the architect for the project. So Josh is the architect and along with Bob. And then Tealwood Senior Living will be the operator for the facility, so they'll be running the day in and day out. They are out of the Minneapolis area primarily, but they've partnered with us for a couple of projects here in Wisconsin, running both 2 properties now and a couple coming down the pipeline. They have 50 or so facilities across 5 states, so they're pretty familiar with the industry and the business.
Sorry, what is the name of that? Tealwood? Like
Tealwood,
Tealwood.
as in Teal.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Alderperson Engelberger has been waiting.
Yep.
So I'll
Thank you, Aaron. I just had a question for the operator, and I just found out they're out of Minneapolis, you said?
Mhm.
And do they have other properties in the city here or around Dane County or the area?
No, well, in Dane County, they're running a facility in Fort Atkinson, and then one in Mequon at the moment. They are familiar with various parts of Wisconsin, not necessarily Stoughton specifically, but they've had a lot of time spent reviewing the market study and some of the other properties in the area, and they've had a lot of input with us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderperson Reeves.
I was just going to comment to Regina's, what Regina mentioned. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience is that Medicaid and Medicare does not pay for assisted living. It's not a qualified medical expense. It will pay for a qualified nursing home expense, but in general, it doesn't cover assisted living unless something has changed with.
There's some Medicaid waivers that can come in for an RCAC, so we could take some patients on Medicaid as well.
Yeah, that's pretty short term, though. Am I correct about that? I mean, in general, would you say that your payer mix is not going to be?
Correct. Not.
It's private pay.
Some, but it would not be the majority.
Okay, thank you. Alderperson or Council President Swadley.
Thank you. I don't know if you can answer the questions for me, but this is the kind of information I'm looking for. I didn't realize you were here earlier. So I'm trying to figure out what the value of the building's going to be because it's in the TIF district. So I'm trying to figure out, what the increment is going to be.
Oh, okay.
And then also, as I mentioned earlier, so what the value is so we can calculate what the net new construction will be, because that's what allows us to raise our taxes to pay for the additional cost of services that may be needed.
So you're looking for what the cost of construction is for the building? It's approximately 16 million.
16 million, okay. And then the other question I had was related to the jobs. Do you have any idea how many jobs and kind of the range, the pay range might be?
Sure. I don't know that I can speak to the pay range off the top of my head.
Sure.
The number of staff will probably be, there will be about 5 to 10 full-time administrative type positions. One thing to keep in mind is that as we go through lease up, it'll be a kind of slow process, adding more, primarily dietary and nursing staff over time. I think all in, probably about 40 to 50 staff or so. I can look up some numbers and get back to you.
Sure, thank you.
Alderperson Truul.
I was going to say, within your packet, you indicated that in total, we expect about 22 nursing, dietary, and housekeeping staff for a total project staff of about 30 employees is
Okay.
what your packet
That
indicated.
might, yep, I would go off of that.
I thought I saw it somewhere, but I couldn't find it. Okay. Thanks, Scott.
All right, thank you. Further questions regarding Resolution 75? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. Motion carries with 1 no. Resolution 76 of 2017 comes from our Planning Commission. Alderperson Truul.
Speaking of Walmart, The Plan Commission brings forth Resolution 76-2017, approving a conditional use permit request by Craig Whitehead Crown Group to allow for outdoor display use for Tractor Supply, Inc. at 1800 U.S. Highway 51-138 in Stoughton. Plan Commission recommended approval unanimously, 6-0, and I would move approval.
Second.
Motion by Truul, second by Engelberger. Alderperson Truul.
This is a, Tractor Supply is looking to utilize the western end of the former Walmart facility and their outdoor, screened-in, fenced-in area that previously existed. And then they additionally had looked at some additional outdoor display, which in part is the reason why we also needed to look at this from a conditional use permit in terms of allowing that.
That's right.
All right, thank you. Comments or questions? Alderperson, nice. I've got something stuck there.
I'm looking at the packet materials, and there was some questions regarding the trees and how it was going to be done, and I'm not really particularly pleased when I see a net loss of landscaping trees in a landscape design. According to this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them to be removed because they want to have better vision for the front of their large parking lot, asphalt C. Do we have requirements in place for number of trees per stalls?
If the parking lot was being reconfigured, yes. Then there would be parking lot, there might be some requirements for that. The landscaping plan they've proposed is something that may or may not be required per se. They're trying to make improvements to it. They are providing more plants, plant point total, not trees. I'm just speaking to what their proposal is. If this was reviewed as a new site, they would be required to have 174 landscaping points. They're providing 390-ish, I believe, on the front. Certainly there's discussion about street trees. They had indicated during the meeting that their interest is if they can't improve the landscaping plan as they proposed, they'd probably just leave the trees that they have in place out there. And many of them, I think, are conifer trees or coniferous trees. I'm not a tree person, but they're not all deciduous trees in the front. So I think they are blocking some of the view. They're certainly trying to capture an improved sight line to the facility.
I think the sight line is fine just the way it is. I think everybody in this town pretty much knows where that is and can pretty much see it from 51. Like I said, net loss of trees always concerns me. I'm having a hard time going to be voting for this right now, unless somebody can convince me otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Alderperson Truul.
And to Alderman Mayeski's comments, it was clearly discussed at plan as well. A number of the members raised the concern, and while we didn't get a absolute guarantee back, again, I think the minutes do reflect that the developer, and that's Mr. Whitehead, a number of the commission members asked about the possibility of reintegrating trees and something. I think what ended up happening was there was as much of a discussion about the developer indicating that if we were pushing to keep the trees, he was inclined not to want to go and do the increased landscaping that he's looking for. A number of the commission members asked at that point if there was a way to integrate some new trees into his development, and he indicated he would certainly look to do that. As Rodney indicated, a little unusual situation because they were coming back with a lot of points from a landscape standpoint, but clearly in terms of an overall city perspective of having street trees, this plan is moving away from that.
Yeah.
And I certainly understand your concerns.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Thank you. Alderperson Engelberger.
Thank you, Your Honor. With regard to the trees, Scott's absolutely right. And I think also he did mention he would possibly take a look at putting in like some crab trees or something like that with the what they've got there, or he'd be, you know, look into that or whatever. And then I guess the other thing I just wanted to mention to Rodney, I appreciate, Rodney, you and Michael, and seems like you haven't been bringing back as many exceptions lately, and I really appreciate that, as Alder Truel pointed out. I don't know if that's got to do with any of the stuff we've been talking about the last year or two, but hopefully it is. And I just wanted to thank you, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hopefully you're making an effort to do that on all projects.
I have to, first of all, admit I don't propose the exceptions. The developer does, but I appreciate your comments.
If you're fighting them off, then I appreciate that.
Yes.
There you go. Further comments or questions? Alderperson Reeves.
I just had a question, and although I never, again, repeat what everybody else is saying, I don't like removing trees, but we're really voting on whether or not they can put up an outdoor display, correct? I mean, that's what this is. So that's kind of a non-negotiable thing this evening, right? Okay.
Yep. Okay, seeing no more, Alderperson Truel.
To that point, just as a clarification, the site plan that's in front of us now suddenly, and again, suddenly, it now shows you know, a very large pad site for another outside use. I would tell you that the commission has, I think it's fair to say, has serious questions or doubts or whatever about what we're going to ultimately see there. That would take different action coming back before us. But to your point, the motion, the actual action before us was really to deal with the outdoor, the shaded outdoor storage.
Thank you. Alderperson Hirsch.
I guess that's what I was looking for. What are we actually voting on today? It's just that shaded off to the left of the building, not the landscaping.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Alderperson Reeves, and then Majewski.
And just one more quick comment, which may or may not be relevant for, well, I feel like it's relevant, but in Beloit, they had a similar situation. I don't know if it was a Tractor Supply, but I feel like they were short-sighted and they didn't like the idea of outdoor stuff. And they said no to that, and the whole thing kind of fell apart and off they went. So I don't know if anybody is questioning. I mean, I don't have any problem with the outdoor display, but if anybody is concerned about it, and I don't know if this would be a deal breaker or not, but I will be supporting the, you know, the outdoor display. I want something in there. I don't want it vacant. So.
Alderperson Majewski, and then Swadley.
Outdoor display is fine. How far off of the property line is it, and what are they doing to minimize the impact on the neighbors?
Meets the distance requirements. I believe it's 5 feet. The gradient, or the colored area up in the upper left, is fenced in with a decorative, I'll try to get you a display. That's the type of fencing that's proposed in that area. There was conversation about outdoor speakers. They've been assured that outdoor speakers aren't going to be creating an issue. The applicant actually is the owner of the entire facility, just for the group to know. This entire campus is owned by the Crown Group. So Walmart was a tenant of this building, not an owner of the facility. And Pick and Save is still a tenant of the Crown ownership building.
Is the brown section where the trailers are, is that also considered outdoor display?
This is outdoor display along the left-hand side, correct?
Yes.
And will there be a fence for that also?
There is not, and it's not adjacent to residential, so the adjacent land use would dictate if there's additional screening requirements. So there is not any required in this area.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Council President Swadley, and then Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, to the point that Alderperson Reeves made with the outdoor display, and I had this conversation with Rodney, because I visited 2 of their locations in one day when I was traveling for work, and I would have to say if the outdoor display was proposed in the outlet area, I would be opposed to the plan, but since it's displayed on the side of the building, I'm okay with it, because at the one location I went to, the outdoor display was neatly arranged and looked very professional, but at the other one, not so much, and I think that would have potentially caused some problems. So my question is if they wanted to move their outdoor display, would they have to resubmit a plan to do so?
Yep.
Yep.
You're approving the outdoor display areas as identified in the plan.
Okay, and as far as the trailers, I would say at both locations that I visited, they had them nicely aligned in a row, and they were new trailers, they looked neat, and they basically just cable locked them together so nobody decides to back up and take one until they purchase it. So I think that'll look fine there. But I would keep an eye on the display because it could become unsightly for the neighbors to the left there. So, you know, that's something that I don't know if our ordinance would cover that, or if we got complaints, what our response would be. But, you know, I would just communicate to them that the expectation is that the fenced-in area will always look, you know, professional. And I think that's probably based on the local management in that facility. So I just think it's something that we should keep an eye on, but I'm going to support the plan.
Thank you. I have Alderperson Johnson and then Truul.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think, Rodney, you answered this already, but I noticed on one of the pages, and just to reiterate, they're not, one of the plans said that they had a outdoor gas station service area.
Yeah, our action tonight does not approve any outdoor gas area or anything in this outlot area.
I know that. I kind of know that, but I want planning to know that I'm not going to be happy if it's not looked at properly, okay? Because I don't get a say at planning unless I'm on it or come as a person. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderperson Truul.
Thank you. And that was my comment before, indicating that the outlot is shown here, and there was some preliminary discussion at some of the planning commission members saying, what is this and what's being proposed? Having said that, I guess the other issue that Sid had touched on briefly, to the lighting, that was one of the questions we did ask. Walmart did have the lot relamped previously, so they indicated that no additional lighting would be happening as a part of this. So.
Yeah, that's what I read.
Right.
And what about this only one speaker on each side, or I didn't understand that.
As Rodney had mentioned earlier, there was discussion. We did have a question back to talking about the neighborhood and concerns about outdoor music, sounds, paging equipment, things like that, and they indicated it's very limited. It's just basically it's what's immediately there within the building, so it shouldn't bother the neighbors.
It's volume controlled as well.
Right.
Right.
Is that common in something like that to have outdoor speakers with music?
It's not uncommon, I guess.
On Main Street.
Good point. Played all weekend. Further comments or questions? All right. Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution 76, 2017, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no? That motion carries. At this point, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Move to go into closed session. Council may meet in closed session for state statute 1985, parent 1, parent C, considering position classification and compensation of the City of Stoughton IT operations specialist. Council may reconvene in open session, take action on the position classification and compensation of the City of Stoughton IT operations specialist position. Yes or no?
Thank you. Motion by O'Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Majewski. We'll vote by roll call.
Hirsch.
Aye.
Wadley.
Aye.
Boersma.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Reeves. Aye. Majewski.
Aye.
Engelberger.
Aye.
Jensen. Truul.
Aye.
O'Connor.
Aye.
Bartlett.
Aye.
That motion carries
That's kind of
unanimously.
nice. I kind of like it.
We need to see that. To order to address Resolution 77 of 2017, coming from our Personnel Committee. Alderperson Majewski. I was looking the wrong way.
I'm sorry. I'm totally.
I could do that.
Move to
here.
approve.
Okay, too.
Yeah.
Sid's got it. Sid's got it, yeah.
Stuff, Adam.
Ready to go.
Personnel presents Resolution 77, 2017, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to update the media production specialist position description to communication manager and IT operations specialist at pay grade of 12 and placing the current incumbent at step 4 in the position grade.
And I second.
Motion by Majewski, seconds by Boersma. Comments or questions, or further comments or questions, I should ask? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
I think Alderperson Majewski was first, second by Alderperson Jennings. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries.